All right, everyone. Welcome once again to the Faces of Business. I'm your host, Damon Pistolka, and I am so excited for our guest today because with me, I have Alicia Butler Pierre from Equilibria. Thanks for being here today, Alicia.
Thank you for having me. And I'm noticing that part of my E has fallen down on my wall. So let me just kind of change the angle of my camera there so that we can just hide that. Yeah, there
Yeah,
we go.
there we go. We're good. We're good. So, Alicia, awesome having you here today. Kurt and I talked with you a while back on the Manufacturing E-commerce Success Show.
Mhm.
And man, we were talking about building business infrastructure there. And that's why I wanted to have you come back and talk about building an effective business infrastructure, because it is a problem that most business people don't consider, and probably
Mhm.
one of the most important things they should consider.
Absolutely.
So
At least I think so. And I know
yes,
you think so.
we'll talk about it in a moment, but let's just back up a moment because I want to do a little bit of a proper introduction of you, because I think we're just going to go and talk about this a little bit.
Okay. All right.
Alicia is on a quest to revolutionize the way small businesses operate. She does this by speaking, coaching, writing, lecturing, and podcasting. Now, you're a best-selling author, Behind the Facade. It is the world's first published book on business infrastructure. So, Behind the Facade, people, if you haven't gotten it, get it. And let's see, adjunct professor of lean principles at Purdue University and operations management at Nichols College, a chemical engineer turned entrepreneur, and you have advised, designed, and optimized processes for organizations like Coca-Cola, Shell Oil, the Library of Congress, and Home Depot.
That is
Awesome.
correct. Thank you, Damon. Thank you
Awesome.
very much.
It's great because I think that gives us a little perspective of who we're really talking to here.
I promise there's so much more to me than what you just read.
We will get into that because that's the cool business stuff. That's the things that happen. So
Right.
let's start out and back up a little bit.
Okay.
Growing up, you're in high school.
Mm-hmm.
What drew you to go to school for chemical engineering?
Okay. Well, I wish I could tell you that it was a clean linear path of getting there, but it was not. And I know
Awesome.
you already know this story, Damon, but for your listeners and for those who are watching us right now live, I actually wanted to be a journalist. That was my first love. That was my passion. I loved English, my English classes. I loved literature, and I wanted to be a journalist. But around the time that I was a junior in high school, I remember taking chemistry, and I realized I had an aptitude for chemistry. And by the time I got into my senior year of high school, instead of taking physics, which was, at my high school, I went to a magnet high school, so you still had to take a science class in your senior year. Most people took physics. I actually took an advanced chemistry course. And I can remember during my senior year, at some point, my teacher, Mrs. Kablis, who actually was Ukrainian, interestingly enough, but she took a particular interest in my life beyond high school.
Mm-hmm.
And she started to ask me, what was I going to major in? So as I was filling out all of these different applications to apply for different universities and colleges, she was just curious, like, what are you planning to major in? And I said, well, chemistry, because I really like it. I'm really good at it. And she said, you might want to rethink that, because if you want to make money coming out of school as a chemist, you would have to go all the way up to the PhD level. But if you choose chemical engineering, you can go to school, get an undergraduate degree, and you can come out making great money right away in 4 or 5 years. So the motivating factor was money at the end of the day.
There
I
you
wish
go.
I could tell you, is because wow, I heard about chemical engineering. I really liked it. I was drawn to it. I knew other engineers. No, that was not the case for me at all. I literally went with something that my teacher told me. I trusted her and I went for it. And that is how I ended up studying studying chemical engineering and eventually working as a chemical engineer.
Cool. So when you got out and you started out and working in chemical engineering, what were a couple things that really surprised you about when you started working in chemical engineering?
One of the things that surprised me was the fact that I didn't understand the business of, I was making Roundup. So I was making poison. I was making, and I always tell people, don't judge me, don't judge. But I was working for Monsanto and I was making Roundup. And our daily production schedules could be very erratic, Damon. One day you could be told to operate at 100% capacity. The very next day, you may be told to scale it back by 50%. And then the day after that, you might be told to shut down altogether. And then after that, you're back running full throttle again. So, what seemed to be just erratic decision leaders or decision makers, excuse me, was really rooted in supply and demand, market fluctuations. But I didn't have an appreciation for that. I was in my own little zone. I was in my silo and I was literally just acting out on whatever orders or commands I was given without having an appreciation for the business of manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I realized probably about my second year working as an engineer, like I am grossly deficient in the language of business. I don't understand it. I don't speak it. When I hear it, I may as well literally hear another language. I don't understand it. And so I decided to go back to school, to business school. So I was pursuing an MBA. I was going to school at night, working full time during the day. That was one major thing that I learned. Another major thing that I learned was the people issues that exist in companies. So it was interesting because while I knew the technical part of my job. I knew that. I could do the calculations. I could monitor the process and figure out what went wrong and at what point, those kinds of things. The technical aspect had it down pat. So I didn't understand the language of business, but I also did not have an appreciation for people dynamics, team dynamics. And what do you do when someone sabotages something in the process because they're angry about something that somebody else did? And they're just, I didn't learn those kinds of things when I was in school, but that was the reality of working on the job. You can have the best ideas in the world and things that you want to get executed, but if you don't have strong people skills, strong interpersonal communication skills, you are not going to get it done. I would say those are the two most important lessons, Damon, that I personally learned during my stint as an engineer.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are great. Those are great. Yes. That is similar. The business side of it, I really had a wake up call in one of my few jobs into mine. Is I worked with some people that were had come out of the management financial consulting area, and I'm an engineer, right? I understand how to run, like you said, run facilities, run processes, and those guys run businesses, but I did not know the financial side of it, and it really is something that first time when you sit there and you're really skilled in a certain part of the business, but when you hear, like you said, almost a foreign language going on, you realize I need to either you want to learn more about it or you want to run in the other direction. So that's great. That's great. So as you're going along, what really was the tipping point or the point where you just said, I want to have my own business?
Great question. Because again, it wasn't planned. I shouldn't say that. I had always dabbled in little side hustles.
Yeah.
Starting when I was 7 years old. My very first side hustle, the daycare that I would go to after school, I would actually make money by doing little simple chores around the daycare. I would sweep the carport or the driveway. I might just do things. Don't worry, no child protection,
Yeah.
no child labor laws were
Yeah.
violated.
Yeah.
But it was enough for me to make a little money, and to a 7-year-old,
Yeah.
$5 is a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
At that time I could buy a lot of candy with that
You
$5.
bet.
But I always had something that I always had a way of making money, especially when I was in high school. Did all kinds of things. I would sell candy. I would do all kinds of things to make money. But when when I was living in New Orleans, so that's where I was when I was working as a chemical engineer, New Orleans, Louisiana,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a really bad tropical storm around August, September of 2004. And I remember being stuck in my home, thinking I was fully prepared, Damon, to meet my maker. I was. I really thought I was going to die because I was in my house, I was alone, and the water just kept rising. And that is a scary feeling, let me tell you. And eventually the rain stopped, the water pumps were turned on, the water receded. It's disgusting
Yeah.
after a hurricane. It is after any kind of a flood. It's absolutely disgusting. But I just remembered after that, I just had this thought, this intuitive feeling, this gut feeling that I needed to get out and get out quick, fast, and in a hurry. At that time, I was working for a family owned engineering consulting firm. I abruptly quit that job. So this was like, again, September 2004.
Mm-hmm.
I graduated with my MBA from Tulane University by that December. The following January 2005, I put my house up for sale. It sold within a week. And I relocated, Damon, to Atlanta, Georgia, where I knew one person at the time. And I looked at Atlanta compared to New Orleans. Atlanta was a land of milk and honey. Okay. I remembered studying and reading about the large corporate presence here, the
Mm-hmm.
fact that Coca-Cola is headquartered here and Delta Airlines, Chick-fil-A, Home Depot. And I thought, oh, I'm going to move to Atlanta. And who wouldn't want to hire me? I have this engineering background. I'm a newly minted MBA. I have this great combination. And I got here, Damon, and the competition is fierce because there are a lot of really smart, bright, intelligent people who live here. And I remember thinking I wanted to work at Coca-Cola. I wanted to work at Coca-Cola because I studied about them as a company so much when I was working on my MBA. And I thought it would be really cool if I could work there. But as fate would have it, it only took me a good 60 days of what seemed to be endless job searching, soulless job searching, because
Mm-hmm.
at that point, it was right around the time when things were starting to transition to being online.
Yes.
And it just seemed like you go through all of the rigor of tailoring your resume and a cover letter, and you're submitting these applications online, and then you never hear anything back. And it was just soul crushing. And after about 60 days of that, through some introspection, I started reflecting on, well, what is it that I'm really good at? What are my natural skills, talents, and abilities? Can I build a business around that?
Mm-hmm.
And through that introspection, I realized I've always had a knack for organizing things. Every job that I ever had, even when I was a teenager flipping burgers, I excelled at my jobs not because I was the smartest person in the room or the sharpest knife in the drawer. I did well because I was very organized and I've always been process oriented. And so I literally went online, started doing some searching, and figured out that there was an actual professional association for organizers called NAPO, which is the National Association of Professional Organizers. I joined that organization. I went to an Office Depot. I bought one of those Avery business card packs that you can feed into a desk jet or an
Yeah.
inkjet printer. And I made myself some business cards, Damon, and I just started going to different chambers of commerce, different networking events. And as they say, I hung up my shingle and I just started putting myself out there. And when I first started my company, Equilibria, it was a professional organizing company. Again, this was 2005. So keep in mind, I relocated to Atlanta in February of 2005. 6 months later, Hurricane Katrina happened in New Orleans.
Oh,
So talk about dodging a
timing.
bullet. I mean, yeah. So remember, and the reason I like to share that part of my story is because for those who are listening to us right now, watching us right now, sometimes we have these, again, these intuitive thoughts and feelings, and we can't explain it. It seems so irrational, but sometimes they just won't go away. And I'm so glad I paid attention to it because it did seem crazy. I had a nice life, Damon, in New Orleans. I really did. I had a home. I rented out the front part of my house. I would travel. I was young. I was single. I didn't have any children. I was completely, I used to say that I was single, sexy, and free.
There you go.
And I had a great life. And I disrupted all of that to venture into the unknown. I took a bet on myself, and everybody around me thought that I was absolutely crazy.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So imagine you have this feeling, you act on it. Everybody expects you to fail. Everybody expects you, oh, she'll be back home. Don't worry. She'll be back. She'll realize the error of her ways. But I've been here now for, gosh, 18 years. Coming up on
Yeah.
18 years.
Nice.
Yeah. And I never looked back. It has not been easy. I do want to be very clear about that. It has not been easy, but I could not imagine what my life would be like had I not made that decision. I am a much I am a much more well-rounded, more experienced, much more traveled person today, I believe, than I would have been had I stayed in New Orleans.
Very cool. Very cool. Yes. So you're gonna hang out your shingle, and now you're going down the roadways, and you look through your history, and you go, it wasn't very long, and you decided that you wanted to start working on business infrastructure.
Right.
How did that come about? I mean, because you look at it, you just go, how would you choose that?
The way that happened, I started Equilibria in 2005, and about 2 years after that, I received a phone call from a district attorney's office, and it was from the district attorney herself. And I'll never forget, I was so nervous. I thought I was in trouble. I thought I had done something wrong because she rattled off her name, and I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Why is this person calling me? But it turns out she had seen me on a local television program, and she was interested in having me come to her office and get things organized. And that's when I realized, Damon, and I know this is really going to be me showing my age and my naivete at that time in life, because I was about 20, 29, 30 years old at this time. And I'll never forget when I went over there and I'm talking to her and I'm talking to her executive assistant and some of the other attorneys. And I remember walking back to my car thinking, wow, so organizations are disorganized too, companies are disorganized. Like, I didn't have a concept of that because I
Yeah.
came from a very structured environment when I worked
Mhm.
as an engineer. Everything was orderly. There were processes for
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
So I truly had never been exposed to a chaotic situation in any other type of working environment.
Yeah.
And I remember being a part of a networking group at the time called Power Core. And I went to a Power Core meeting and I befriended a lady who was a marketing consultant. And she said, you know, Alicia, every time I listen to you and you're starting to do more and more of these commercial, quote, air quotes, commercial projects, you're getting further and further away from professional organizing. Let me do a branding. I forgot what she called it. I don't remember if it was called a brand assessment, a brand evaluation, but whatever it was, I credit Jill Pullen with telling me, strongly suggesting to me, you know, you need to stop referring what you're doing as professional organizing, especially when you're working with these businesses, because what you're really doing is you're going in there and you're putting in place a business infrastructure. And I didn't know what that was. So I literally defined what it was. And maybe I'm bullheaded about this, Damon, just stubbornly just decided to stick with business infrastructure. The reason I say that is because it is a blessing and a curse. It's a
Mhm.
blessing in the sense that there are not a lot of people out there in the world that talk about it. But it is a curse in the sense that there aren't a lot of people out there in the world talking about it. So when the companies that my company works with, when they are seeking assistance and support and they go online, they don't use the words business infrastructure. They're using all kinds of other
Mhm.
keywords to try to find a company like Equilibria. So it's a great thing to have that first mover advantage in your space, but just know, for those who are listening right now, it means you have to work that much harder to educate people about what it is you do, what business or whatever your topic or product or service is. You just have to work a lot harder to get the information out there. You truly have to educate before you can even begin selling.
Mhm. Yes. Yes, and that's a great point because you're right. You put something together that many people didn't know much about, but they so you got to show them what it is.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, very cool. So you get into business infrastructure, you start using it, you start developing a system. Now,
Mhm.
I can't say it, but tell me the name of your system.
It's called Kasennu.
Kasennu.
Yes. So Ka and Sinu, which are two ancient Egyptian words. Ka is ancient Egyptian for spirit, and Sinu is ancient Egyptian for like twin or similitude or clone. So the
Okay.
idea is that once you've figured out your secret sauce, like once you've really figured out what is it that keeps your customers coming to you, how can you clone or replicate that over and over and over again? How can you clone the spirit or the essence of what makes your company so great?
Very cool. Very cool. That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, and then I mean, you wrote a book about business infrastructure.
Mhm.
I'm assuming talking about your process and the cloning the secret sauce. So as you're helping people do this, what what are some of the things that they say once they've seen what you can help them do?
The things that they say, because of the way we actually deliver the services, because of the framework that we actually use, one of the things that surprises people is how we use visual aids to quickly help people get the information that they need, so that, because they don't want to do this. They don't want to do it because it's getting into the nitty-gritty details, and they think it's because it's operations, it's going to be so boring, and they just don't want to be bothered with it. But when I put up something like this, I'm holding up a stick figure.
Yep.
And when I start showing little index cards and things like that, and I say, you know what? We're going to take stick figures and index cards, two very simple, low cost tools. We're going to take everything that you do. We're going to get that information out of the heads of you and your team members, put that onto those index cards, spread everything around, figure out who's supposed to be doing what. We're going to use stick figures to help us figure that out. And because it's so interactive and it's hands-on, we're standing up the whole time, people really get into it. And they get excited. Like, wow, that was a lot of work, but that was also a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Wow, how did we do that? I did a workshop, Damon, just last month with a very large company, because we typically work with small businesses, but there are times when we work with much larger organizations as well. And so this is a large publicly traded company, and they had this particular team was tasked with coming up with all of the processes that they needed to document. And they were scratching. I mean, literally everybody expected the worst. They really did. You know, there were all kinds of personalities in the room. And we had to get this done in 3 days. Normally something that I would prefer to stretch out over 45 to 60 days, we had to get done in 3 days because people were coming from all over the country to this one location. They knew it just would be too prohibitively expensive to try to have these on-site in-person sessions and spread them out over several weeks. So they said, listen, you got to get it done within this time frame. And so we were in a room, huddled together, and there was conversation, Damon, conversations that never took place before. People were saying things like, wow, I didn't know you did it that way. Well, why? And you know what? We actually use a tool for that part of our process. So did you hear about that? Oh, you didn't? Or, you know, we're actually doing the same thing. Who would have thought? So that's what happens when I'm working with companies of any size. They're having the conversations. They get really into these exercises. They're highly interactive. And again, we're using all kinds of different visual aids to help them get that information, wrap their heads around it that much quicker. So some of the outputs from all of this, when we talk about business infrastructure, we're helping them figure out what work needs to be done, who ideally should do that work. Because remember, just because you can doesn't mean that you should. And especially for founders and CEOs of smaller businesses, we're wearing so many hats. But when you go through an exercise like this, the point of it is to help you figure out, yeah, you might be doing this today, but are you really the best person to perform that particular task? Should you really be spending your time doing that when you could be doing something else to help bring more business into to help generate more business? So we have those conversations. The outputs are, getting back to the 4 questions. What work needs to be done? How is that work organized into departments? Who will perform that work? And how is that work performed? And the outputs of these different exercises with all these visual aids, they have their job descriptions now, which are much more succinct, much more transparent, and much more comprehensive. They also have an organizational chart that they can now use as a growth strategy plan to share with other people on the team. They also have a guide for how they can organize their physical records as well as their digital records and files. It also gives them an idea of how to best lay out their physical workspace. And then finally, it helps them figure out what processes do they need to document? And then they can actually begin to document those processes. So that in its totality, all of those pieces together form business infrastructure. It is literally linking the people, the processes, and all of the different tools and technologies that you're using to operate your business on a day-to-day basis, bringing all of those things together, linking them so that when there's a change in one of them, you immediately understand how it impacts the other two.
Yeah.
So if you hire somebody, how does that impact process? Do you even have a process? Do they need access to certain technologies? So you don't do anything in isolation of the other elements, in other words, of the business infrastructure. That's what it's really all about. That's what helps you form a foundation that's solid enough that you can keep building, growing, and ultimately scaling without the wheels falling off.
Yes. Yes. As we see so many times, because if that foundation and that the process and the infrastructure is not there, like you said, you'll get to a certain size and it starts to come apart.
Yep.
Yeah.
Build it to last. Build it with the intention of it lasting, even though we know it won't go on forever, but at least build it with that in mind. And I always tell people, because you mentioned me and my work with Lean Six Sigma, that's one of the tenets of Lean Six Sigma is continuous improvement over perfection, because perfection can actually paralyze us. Because if we're in pursuit of perfection, it'll never be perfect. But if you instead say, you know what, we're going to just continuously innovate, we're going to continuously improve this, because there's always room for improvement.
Yes. Yes. So it's been awesome talking to you, Alicia, about business infrastructure, building effective business infrastructures, your process, your Kasennu process for building business infrastructure. It's very good. Awesome stuff. I've seen some of the videos, watching you guys in action. It's got to be a riot doing it, because honestly, I've had to document a lot of business process and help people do it. It is not the most fun thing to do.
Exactly.
That's great. That's great. But I do want to talk about something that I saw on LinkedIn that was very interesting to me.
Okay.
And that is, you are a volunteer artifact registrar, and you work with American, Egyptian, and British historians on an Egyptologist. What is this?
What is that all about? So this idea of building things to last. So that's a great segue. Thank you so much for that. It happens so naturally, Damon. Thank you. So when we look at these ancient civilizations, because before we started recording, you and I were talking about this. When ancient civilizations built things, they built it with the intention of it lasting forever. And that is why many of these structures are still standing to this very day. And as we were talking about before the recording started, some of it still needs to be unearthed. It may be buried, whether under land or under sea. But the point is, it's still there. It's intact. They took their time. They understood team dynamics. I've always been a fan of ancient civilizations, in particular, ancient Egypt. And back in 2012, I think it was, so 10 years ago, 10 and a half years ago, I had the opportunity to volunteer on a restoration project in Luxor, Egypt.
Wow.
And there were a team of Americans, there were a team of British volunteers, and we all came together and we worked on the restoration of what's considered to be a temple tomb complex for an ancient priest, Egyptian priest, by the name of Karakamun. And it was an experience I will never forget. I treasure it. I learned so much. But again, just how does that relate to business infrastructure? Again, they understood, they built things with the intention of it lasting. Here's a really simple thing that I can share with you, Damon, you and your audience. I never realized this, but in that particular temple tomb complex, it's interesting because many people may not realize this, but the minute someone became a pharaoh, okay, work began immediately on that person's tomb. So you can instantly tell when you go into the Valley of the Kings, for example, where many of these ancient Egyptian pharaohs were buried, or the Valley of the Queens, you can always tell who died young or who died quickly after becoming pharaoh because their tombs are much smaller. That's why the tomb of King Tut is so tiny, because he was so young and he was, he died very early in life. Whereas there are other kings or pharaohs and their tombs are massive. But inside of this particular temple tomb complex, you can actually see, so what we consider to be hieroglyphs, what we call hieroglyphs, in ancient Egyptian, the term was actually the metu neter. And so you would have an apprentice actually draw the hieroglyphics first. They drew it in black ink or black paint on a stone wall. The master teacher would go behind that apprentice and make the corrections in red. It's the opposite of what we do here in the United States. Think about it. When we were kids and we were in school, our teachers always corrected things in red ink. I'm sorry, I'm saying that the opposite. They drew in red and corrected in black, I believe.
Okay.
Is what they did in Egypt. I apologize. Please forgive me for that.
Good.
So that's how they made the corrections. Then there was another person. So once the master teacher kind of went behind and said, no, this isn't at the right angle or whatever, and made the corrections in black, then someone would go behind them and actually start to chisel.
Yes.
Carve it out, carve it literally into the stone. And we're talking several inches deep. Like we look at most stuff now that's carved, modern age, it's maybe half of an inch, maybe. It's not very deep. I'm talking 6, 7, 8 inches deep. Again, they intended it for it to be there forever. And so they're doing that carving. Once the carvings are done, then there was another person to come behind and actually paint it. So this is a perfect example of not only is there a process, but there's a team dynamic that is going on, and they are working in synchronization with each other. A lot of us sit back today in 2023 and we marvel at what the ancients were able to do. How did they do it? A big part of it, Damon, was they were all of one accord. They all knew, you know what? We're starting on this structure today. We know we won't see it through to completion. We'll die before this is completed. But we're going to start it anyway. And because we are all in sync with the mission and the purpose of why we're building this, we can get this done. And we can do it on such a grand scale that it will last forever, unless there's a force of nature that that
wipes it out.
That wipes it out. It will be there.
Yeah.
And I think we've just over thousands and thousands of years, we've lost that.
That's a great point in two things. Like you said, the process and the teamwork to do it. It doesn't do it without, they don't get it done without the first person coming by and laying down the draft, and the second person coming by, the master coming by and say, well, no, this is how we're really going to do it. And certainly the third person making the physical changes of carving into the rock and doing that just right. That's amazing, inches deep, without having, and doing it without having serious errors everywhere.
Exactly.
Because that's not the kind of thing you want to just go, oops, and go start over. Down to the person at the end who painted it with paint that's still there. Some of it
still there. That's still there. And the only reason you may not see paint when you look at some of these structures is because it's been exposed to the elements over
Yes.
so many years. But when you're going into a tomb, it hasn't been exposed to wind or sand or anything like that. So those colors are still so fresh and
Wow.
so vibrant. It is absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And to your point, the precision and the accuracy with which all of this was done. But again, they took their time, Damon.
Mm-hmm.
Today, everything is about speed.
Mm-hmm.
I want it yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
I'll settle for today, but I really want this yesterday.
Yes.
We're in this society of instant gratification.
Mm-hmm.
And the quality, frankly, just isn't there with a lot of products and services.
Mm-hmm. Because you don't have the time to do it.
You don't have the time to do it. And it's going to cost too much money. And I mean,
Yeah.
think about old homes. My
Mm-hmm.
house in New Orleans was built in 1851.
Oh, my.
1851.
Yes.
And when you look at the crown molding and the plastered walls, or, I'm thinking of like a beautiful brownstone in New York or a row house in DC, I mean, or Philadelphia, and you go inside these old homes, and the level of craftsmanship, we just don't see that today.
Yes, that's
Sadly.
true.
Sadly.
That's true. Alicia, thank you so much for stopping by today. We were talking about building effective business infrastructure, and man, we got to talk about how that relates to so many different things, and how Egyptology and what your experiences doing that, helping to restore. Oh my goodness, it's so great to have you here today.
Oh, thank you, Damon.
Thank you for being here. How can people get a hold of you if they want to contact you?
Sure. The best way to contact me personally is probably through LinkedIn. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Alicia Butler Pierre. I also have a website by the same name, aliciabutlerpierre.com. And when you go there, you can see everything. It'll link you to my company's website. It will take you to the book. It'll take you to the podcast. So everything about me, as well as links to all of my social profiles.
Awesome. So aliciabutlerpierre.com. And thanks so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you, Damon.
You bet. Thanks everyone for listening. And we will be back again with another awesome person sharing their information. Hang out, Alicia. We'll talk for a moment when we're done.
Okay.